Picture this. It's 1991. You're standing in a big, loud room at the Detroit Auto Show. The lights are bright, the crowd is buzzing. And then Dodge pulls the cover off something that looks like it escaped from a nightmare. No roof. No doors with windows that go all the way up. No traction control. No airbags. Just a long hood, huge tires, and a massive V10 engine sitting right behind the front wheels like it's daring you to do something stupid. That was the first Dodge Viper RT/10. And the moment people saw it, the entire automotive world lost its mind. This is not a normal car story. This is the story of what happens when a group of crazy engineers at Dodge are told, make the most insane American sports car possible, and they actually listen. In the late 1980s, Dodge was in a strange place. The brand had a tough image, but they didn't have a true halo car. Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche were dominating the supercar conversation. Chrysler president Bob Lutz and a small team of engineers decided they wanted to build something that would shock the world. They didn't want to copy anyone. They wanted to create something raw, loud, and completely American. The idea was simple on paper but insane in practice. Take a big 8.0-liter V10 truck engine, originally developed for trucks and marine use, put it in a lightweight fiberglass body, add almost zero electronics, and see what happens. The first prototype appeared in 1989. It was rough, loud, and terrifying. But it had something special, pure, unfiltered character. When Bob Lutz drove the prototype, he reportedly smiled like a kid and said something like, "We have to build this." The production Viper RT/10 finally arrived in 1992. And it was exactly what they promised, brutal. There was no roof. The side curtains were basically plastic sheets. The interior was minimal, leather, metal, and a giant shifter. The engine made 400 horsepower and a ridiculous amount of torque. 0 to 60 came in under 5 seconds. The top speed was over 160 miles per hour. And because there was almost no electronic nanny systems, the car was completely unforgiving. If you were stupid with the throttle, the Viper would happily spin you into the next zip code. People who drove the first Vipers described it the same way, terrifying and addictive at the same time. One journalist wrote that driving a Viper felt like being strapped to a rocket with no steering wheel. Another said it was the closest thing to a street-legal race car you could buy. The Viper didn't try to be refined. It didn't try to be comfortable. It didn't even try to be practical. It was loud, hot, uncomfortable, and absolutely thrilling. And that's exactly why people fell in love with it. In the next part we'll go deeper, how the Viper was developed, the crazy engineering decisions, what it was like to drive one in the real world, and how it went from a wild idea to a legend. Now imagine you're one of the first journalists who got to drive the production Viper in 1992. You open the ridiculously long door, drop into the low seat, and suddenly you're sitting almost on the floor. The interior is bare bones, leather, aluminum, and a giant curved shifter sticking out of the center console like a sword. There's no radio in some early cars. No fancy screens. Just you, the road, and this monster engine right behind your shoulders. You turn the key. The 8.0-liter V10 wakes up with a deep, angry rumble that shakes the entire car. It doesn't sound like a normal engine. It sounds like something that should be in a boat or a truck, but it's sitting in a lightweight fiberglass body with almost no sound deadening. You press the clutch, it's heavy. You slot the shifter into first gear. And the moment you touch the throttle, the world changes. The Viper doesn't accelerate like a normal car. It lunges forward with savage force. The rear tires scream for mercy. The steering is heavy and direct. There's almost no electronic help, no traction control, no stability control, no ABS in the very first cars. If you give it too much throttle in a corner, the Viper will punish you instantly. It feels alive. Dangerous. Honest. Journalists at the time were split. Some loved it. Some were genuinely scared. One famous review said driving the Viper felt like being attacked by a wild animal that you're trying to steer. Another wrote that it was the closest thing to a street-legal Group C race car you could buy in 1992. The engineering behind it was pure madness. The chassis was developed with help from Lamborghini, who were owned by Chrysler at the time. The suspension was stiff and race car-like. The brakes were huge. But there were also compromises. The car got incredibly hot inside. The side curtains flapped like crazy at speed. The ride was brutal on bad roads. And if it rained, you were basically driving a convertible with plastic sheets for doors. But none of that mattered to the people who bought it. The Viper wasn't bought by people who wanted comfort. It was bought by people who wanted to feel something raw and real in an era when cars were becoming more electronic and sanitized. In 1992, the Viper RT/10 made 400 horsepower. That number sounds normal today, but back then it was insane for a production car. Especially one that weighed relatively little and had rear-wheel drive with almost no driver aids. Owners reported that the car was happiest at full throttle. Anything less and it felt like it was begging you to go faster. The Viper quickly became a cultural icon. It appeared in movies, music videos, and on the covers of every car magazine. It was the car that said, "America is still crazy enough to build this." But it wasn't perfect. Early cars had teething problems, overheating, weird electrical gremlins, and a transmission that could be tricky. Dodge kept improving it every year. In 1994 they added a roof. In 1995 they gave it more power and better brakes. But the spirit remained the same, raw, loud, and uncompromising. In the final part we'll talk about the legacy of the Viper, why it became so valuable today, and what it really represented in the 1990s. By the time the first-generation Viper ended production in 1995, it had already become a legend. It wasn't the fastest supercar in the world. It wasn't the most technologically advanced. It wasn't even the most reliable. But it was one of the most honest cars ever built in the 1990s. The Viper was never trying to be a civilized grand tourer. It was never trying to compete with the refinement of a Ferrari or the precision of a Porsche. It was built to deliver one thing above all else, a raw, visceral, emotional experience. And in that mission, it succeeded completely. People who owned first-generation Vipers often describe them the same way, terrifying at first, then completely addictive. You learn to respect the car. You learn how to drive it. And once you do, few other cars ever feel as alive again. Today, a clean, low-mileage first-generation Viper is a serious collector car. Good examples have appreciated strongly. The early RT/10S with the side curtains are especially desirable because they represent the purest, most extreme version of the idea. People pay premium money for them not just because they're rare, but because they represent a time when car companies were still willing to take big risks. The Viper proved something important. In an era when cars were becoming more electronic, more comfortable, and more similar to each other, Dodge reminded everyone that raw mechanical emotion still mattered. They showed that you could build a car with almost no driver aids and still sell it to the public. They reminded the world that America could still build something wild and unforgettable. The first-generation Viper wasn't perfect. It was hot, loud, uncomfortable, and sometimes unreliable. But that was part of its charm. It forced you to pay attention. It rewarded skill and punished mistakes. In a world full of safe, predictable cars, the Viper stood out like a scream in a quiet room. Looking back almost 30 years later, the Dodge Viper RT/10 feels like a final middle finger from the old school of American performance, a time when engineers were still allowed to be crazy, when marketing departments hadn't completely taken over, and when car companies still built machines that made you feel something real. It was loud. It was raw. It was completely over the top. And we'll probably never see anything quite like it again. Thank you for watching this story about the Dodge Viper. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe. In the comments tell me, would you daily drive a first-generation Viper in 2026? What's the craziest thing you've ever heard about a Viper? And do you think modern cars have lost this kind of crazy character? See you in the next one.